The rain came down like God himself had something to say, and it did not stop for 3 days. Eliza Calloway had not planned to be stranded in Dustfall, Texas. She had not planned much of anything in the past year, if she was being honest with herself. And honesty was something she had been practicing with great difficulty since the death of her husband left her with $43, a half-broken wagon, a mule named Clarence who hated her, and a deed to a piece of land in Colorado she had never seen with her own eyes. It was 1878, and the Western Territories were full of women like her, women who had followed men out into the dust and the heat and the endless sky, and then found themselves alone in it when those men died or left or simply stopped being the men they had promised to be. Eliza's husband, Daniel, had been a good man, but he had also been a reckless one, and recklessness on the frontier tended to have permanent consequences. She had been passing through Dustfall when the sky turned the color of a bruise and the first drops fell. They hit the baked red earth of the main street like small explosions, kicking up puffs of dust that were immediately swallowed by the next drop, and then the next, until the dust was gone entirely, and the street was a river of brown mud, and the sound of rain on tin rooftops was so loud you had to shout to be heard over it. Eliza had pulled Clarence under the overhang of the general store and stood there with her arms wrapped around herself, watching the world dissolve, wondering if Colorado was worth it. The general store was run by a man named Harold Peck, who was short and round, and had the particular brand of cheerfulness that comes from never having suffered very much. He told her the roads north would be impassable until the rain stopped, and that the nearest boarding house had 2 rooms, both occupied by traveling salesmen who showed no signs of going anywhere. He told her this with great sympathy and very little practical help, and then he went back inside his store and closed the door, because Harold Peck was the kind of man who felt things deeply for approximately 45 seconds. Eliza stood under the overhang with rain blowing sideways into her face and thought about what to do. She had very little money left. She could not afford a room even if one were available. She could not sleep in the wagon because the canvas cover had a tear in it that she had been meaning to fix for 2 weeks. She could not go forward and she could not go back, and the rain did not care about any of this. That was when she noticed the man sitting on the steps of the sheriff's office across the street. He was tall, even sitting down. She could tell that from the length of him, the way his long legs stretched out into the rain without him seeming to notice or care that his boots were soaking through. He wore a dark hat with the brim pulled low, and a coat the color of dried grass, and he had a rifle resting across his knees that he was cleaning with a cloth in a slow, methodical way that suggested he had cleaned that rifle approximately 10,000 times before and found it calming. The rain hammered down on him, and he seemed entirely unbothered by it, like a rock in a river that has been there so long the water has simply accepted it. Eliza watched him for a moment, and then the wind changed and threw a sheet of rain directly into her face, and she grabbed her traveling bag and her small wooden case that held the deed and what was left of her money, and she ran across the street through the mud, because the sheriff's office at least had a covered porch that faced in the right direction. She came up the steps in a rush and stood there dripping, and the man looked up at her from under the brim of his hat with eyes that were the particular gray-green color of sage after rain, and he said nothing. He just looked at her in a measuring, unhurried way and then looked back down at his rifle. "I hope you don't mind," she said. The wind shifted. "It does that," he said. His voice was low and even, and he had an accent she could not quite place, something that had started in the South a long time ago and been worn smooth by years of open country. "I'm Eliza Calloway," she said. "I'm passing through, or I was until the rain decided otherwise." He nodded once slowly, the way men out here nodded when they were acknowledging something without necessarily committing to a response. "Cole Mercer," he said finally. She sat down on the other end of the step, as far from him as the narrow porch allowed, and pulled her coat tighter, and they sat in silence while the rain came down in curtains across the main street of Dustfall, Texas, and the world narrowed to the sound of water on wood and tin and earth. That was the beginning of the first day. By the afternoon of that first day, Eliza had learned several things about Cole Mercer. She had learned that he was 31 years old, that he had been the deputy sheriff of Dustfall for the past 2 years, that he was from Georgia originally but had not been back in over a decade, and that he had a horse named Amos that he seemed to regard with the kind of deep, uncomplicated affection that some men reserve for the finest relationships of their lives. She had learned these things not from him volunteering them, but from the slow, patient work of asking questions and waiting, sometimes for quite a long time, for answers. She had also learned that he was watching her with a quiet attentiveness that was somehow different from the way most men watched women in small frontier towns. Most men watched women in small frontier towns the way a dog watches a piece of meat, calculating and hopeful. Cole Mercer watched her the way a man watches something he is trying to understand, with a stillness that was almost respectful, as though he understood that she was a complete and complicated thing, and was in no rush to reduce her to something simpler. The sheriff's name was Walter Briggs, and he came out twice to check on things, and both times he looked at Eliza with a vague suspicion that softened when Cole said, quietly, "She's all right, Walt," and then hardened again slightly when he went back inside, because Walter Briggs did not entirely trust women traveling alone, which was a common failing of men of his particular generation and circumstance. By evening, when it became clear that Eliza had nowhere to sleep, Cole had gone inside and spoken to the sheriff in a low voice, and the result of this conversation was that Eliza was permitted to sleep on the cot in the back room that was usually reserved for prisoners awaiting transport, which was currently empty. It was not comfortable, and it smelled faintly of tobacco and old leather and unwashed men, but it was dry, and dry was everything in the middle of a Texas rainstorm. She lay there in the dark listening to the rain on the roof and thought about Daniel, about how he would have handled this situation with a laugh and a story, because Daniel had always been better at the lightness of things than she was. She was the one who worried, who planned, who kept the accounts and checked the axles, and calculated how many miles they could make before they needed to water the animals. She had thought, sometimes, that they balanced each other well. She thought now that perhaps she had carried more of the weight than she had ever admitted to herself, and that the weight was still there, it had just stopped being shared. She did not cry. She had done her crying in the 6 months since Daniel's death, crying that had felt necessary and exhausting and ultimately insufficient, and she had decided at some point that she was finished with it for the time being. She had a deed to land in Colorado. She had $43. She had Clarence the mule, who hated her but was reliable in the way that creatures who hate you reliably are. She had herself. It would have to be enough. The second day dawned gray and wet, and the rain had not lessened. If anything, it had intensified in the small hours of the morning, and by the time Eliza came out of the back room with her hair pinned up and her face washed in the basin of water that had been left for her, the main street of Dustfall was ankle-deep in running water, and the rain was still falling in steady, relentless sheets. Cole was already on the porch. He had brought 2 tin cups of coffee from somewhere, and he held one out to her when she appeared without being asked, without making a show of it, just held it out in a way that said, "This is for you if you want it." And she took it and sat down beside him, closer than the day before because she was colder, and because yesterday had established something between them that she could not have named precisely, but that felt like the beginning of a tentative trust. The coffee was hot and bitter, and she was grateful for every drop of it. "How long do you think it will rain?" she asked. He looked at the sky with the expression of a man who has spent a great deal of time reading the sky and knows how to do it well. 2 more days, maybe," he said. "Could be less, could be more." 2 more days, she repeated, and let the calculation play out in her mind. 2 more days in Dustfall. 2 more days eating bread and whatever the general store would extend her on credit, which was not much, because Harold Peck's sympathy had an expiration of approximately 45 seconds, as previously established. 2 more days delayed on her journey to Colorado, which she needed to reach before the mountain passes became impassable in autumn, which was approaching with the particular urgency that seasons have when you have a long way to go. "You're worried," Cole said. It was not a question. "I'm always worried," she said. "I come by it naturally." The corner of his mouth moved in a way that might have been the beginning of a smile, though it stopped well short of completion, as though smiling was something he did sparingly and had to think about first. "Where are you from?" he asked. "Missouri," she said. "Originally." "Then Kansas for a while, then I married Daniel and we came south, and then he died and I decided to go north. Colorado. My husband's cousin left us a piece of land. 40 acres near a place called Pueblo. I've never seen it. Daniel always said we'd go, and then he kept finding reasons not to, and then he died, and I thought, well, no more reasons not to." Cole turned the empty coffee cup in his hand slowly, looking at it. "It's a hard journey for a woman alone," he said, and there was nothing in his voice that was condescending about it, just the plain statement of fact that it was, that the roads were rough and the country was wide, and there were men in it who did not behave well. "Most things worth doing are hard," she said. He looked at her then directly, and the gray-green of his eyes in the gray morning light was striking in a way she had not quite registered the day before. "Yes, they are," he said quietly, and she had the strange feeling that he was not entirely talking about Colorado. It was on the afternoon of the second day that the wagon situation became critical. A man from the livery stable came to tell Eliza that Clarence had gotten agitated in the storm and had backed the wagon into the stable wall, and the axle that she had been meaning to fix for 2 weeks had finally given up entirely and broken clean through. The man said it with the particular delicacy of someone delivering bad news to a woman alone, which meant he said it both more carefully and more slowly than necessary, and Eliza listened to all of it and then thanked him and went back to the porch and sat down and looked at the rain for a long time. Cole had been there for all of this. He had stood slightly behind her while the stable man spoke, not interfering, not explaining things on her behalf, just there in the solid, quiet way he had of being present. "How much will the repair cost?" he asked when the man was gone. "More than I have," she said. She said it simply, without self-pity, just as a fact because it was one. He was quiet for a moment. "Wade Hutchins is the blacksmith here. He does good work. I can talk to him." "I can't take charity," she said, and she said it without sharpness, just with the straightforwardness of a woman who has her own particular lines in the dirt. "Nobody said charity," Cole said. "Wade always needs help with accounts. He can't read well and his wife keeps the books, but she's been sick. You could offer to balance his ledger in exchange for the repair work." She looked at him. "Can you read?" he asked. "I taught school in Missouri for 3 years before I married Daniel," she said. The corner of his mouth moved again, further this time. "Then you can probably manage a blacksmith's accounts," he said. It was not charity. He had arranged it so it was not charity, and she appreciated that more than she could easily express, so she simply said, "Thank you, Mr. Mercer," and he said, "Cole," and that was that. She spent the afternoon in the warm, smoky space of the blacksmith shop, going through Wade Hutchins's account books while the rain drummed on the iron roof above her, and Wade watched her work with an expression of enormous relief, because his ledger was in a state of considerable chaos, and his wife Martha had been too ill to address it for 2 months. Eliza worked carefully and methodically, with the focus she had always brought to numbers, sorting the accounts into order and finding 3 separate errors in Wade's favor that he had not known about, which made him look at her as though she had performed a small miracle. By the time she emerged back into the rain to cross to the sheriff's office, the wagon axle had been replaced and Clarence had been moved back into his usual stall, and Wade Hutchins would have done the work for nothing, he said, even without the accounting help, because a woman traveling alone to Colorado with that kind of grit was, in his opinion, owed a little decency by the world. Eliza told him he was very kind and paid him with the accounting work anyway, because her lines in the dirt were her lines in the dirt. Cole was on the porch when she returned, as he had been all day, as he had been all of the first day, and she was beginning to understand that he had not simply happened to be there. He was choosing to be there, in the mornings and the evenings and the long, wet hours in between. And she was choosing not to examine this too closely, because examining things too closely was sometimes the fastest way to ruin them. They ate supper that evening at the only eating establishment in Dustfall, a low room attached to the saloon that served beans and salt pork and corn bread and coffee, so strong it was essentially a threat. The saloon itself was loud with men driven inside by the rain, and the eating room was quieter, lit by 2 lanterns that swayed slightly in drafts from the door. Cole sat across from her at the rough wooden table and they talked, more than they had in 2 days, the food and the relative warmth, and perhaps some slow accumulation of comfort breaking something open between them. She asked him about Georgia, and he told her about it in the careful way of someone describing a place they left under complicated circumstances. He had been 18 when he left, after the war had ended, and the world he had grown up in had been replaced by something that was in many ways better, but was also unrecognizable to a boy raised in the old way of things. His father had not survived the war. His mother had remarried and moved north with her new husband, and Cole had gone west, because west was where a young man went when he did not know where else to go and needed the country to be large enough to lose himself in for a while. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Eliza asked. He considered this for a long time, long enough that she thought he might not answer. "I found something else instead," he said finally. "Something I didn't know I was looking for, this." He made a gesture that she thought encompassed the town, the rain, the frontier itself. The work of it, taking care of a place, making something orderly in all the disorder. "That's why you became a lawman, partly," he said. "And partly because I'm good at being still and watching, and that turns out to be useful." She smiled at that. It was the first time she had smiled. She realized in several days, maybe longer than several days, and it felt strange and good the way warmth feels when you've been cold for a long time and the blood comes back into your fingers. "You are very good at that," she said. He looked at her across the table in the lantern light, and something in his expression shifted in a way that was subtle and significant at the same time, a kind of opening, the way a door that has been closed for a long time swings just slightly on its hinges. "So are you," he said, "good at being still. You don't fill up the silence the way most people do." "Daniel always said I was too quiet," she said. Daniel was wrong, Cole said, with a simple certainty that surprised her, and she found she had nothing to say in response to that, so she said nothing, and the silence between them was not empty but full, the way good silences are. The third day began the same way the second had, gray and wet and relentless, and Eliza came out to the porch and there was coffee, and Cole was there, and something in the familiarity of it felt like it had been happening for years rather than days, like this had always been the shape of mornings, coffee and rain, and the quiet company of this particular man with his rifle and his careful eyes. In the morning, Wade Hutchins's wife, Martha, sent over a basket of food, because Martha Hutchins was a woman who had been sick for 2 months and was getting better and wanted to do something useful, and what she knew how to do was cook. There was corn bread and a jar of preserved peaches and a small cured ham, and Eliza took the basket with genuine gratitude and divided the contents with Cole without making a ceremony of it, just handing him his portion the same way he had handed her coffee without making a show of it. They were learning each other's rhythms in the small, particular way that proximity forces, the way 2 people who spend real time together discover the microgeography of each other's habits. She learned that he drank his coffee without sugar, and that he had a habit of looking at the horizon to the west at roughly the same time each afternoon, not longingly, but assessingly, the way a man checks on something he is responsible for. She learned that he read, which surprised her, because there was a book in his coat pocket, a battered copy of something she couldn't see the title of, and he read it in the quiet hours with the same focused attention he brought to cleaning his rifle. He learned that she braided her hair 3 times a day, which was something she did without seeming to notice she was doing it, her hands going to it automatically when she was thinking hard about something. He learned that she laughed unexpectedly and completely, her whole face changed by it, and that she laughed most readily at things that were absurd rather than things that were merely funny, and that she had a kind of dry wit that she deployed sparingly but with precision. In the afternoon of the 3rd day, sitting on the steps with rain still falling, though lighter now, with breaks in the clouds that let through brief pale bars of light before closing again, Eliza asked him the question that had been forming in her mind since the first morning. She asked it simply, the way she did most things. "Why have you stayed?" she said. "You've been out here with me for 3 days, Cole. You've brought me coffee and arranged the blacksmith and sat through this rain when you didn't have to. Why?" He was quiet for so long that she thought again that he might not answer, and she was preparing to let it go, to accept the silence as his answer, when he said a single word. "You, just that." One word spoken quietly into the rain-wet air, and then he looked at her with those gray-green eyes, and she saw in them something that she recognized because she had felt it too, building slowly in the 3 days of rain and coffee and conversation. Something she had not expected and had not been looking for and was suddenly, startlingly, certain was real. She did not say anything for a long moment. The rain came down, lighter now, a soft hiss rather than a roar. "That is a very significant word," she said at last. "Yes," he said. "You don't strike me as a man who says things he doesn't mean." "No," he said. "Then you should know," she said carefully, "that this is very inconvenient timing. I have a deed to land in Colorado. I have a mule named Clarence who hates me and a wagon with a new axle. I have $43 and a long way to go." "I know," he said. "I'm not saying that to push you away," she said. "I'm saying it because you are an honest man and you deserve honest information." He looked at the horizon to the west, the way he did every afternoon, and then he looked back at her. "My term with Sheriff Briggs ends in November," he said. "He's been looking for a replacement. The county up near Pueblo has been looking for a deputy for 6 months. She stared at him. "You looked that up," she said. "I sent a wire this morning," he said, "while you were at the blacksmith." She did not know what to say. She was not a woman who was easily left without words, but she was without them now, looking at this quiet, deliberate, careful man who had sent a wire to Colorado over his morning coffee while she was balancing a blacksmith's ledger. "Cole," she said. "I'm not proposing anything rash," he said, and there was a slight edge of what might have been nervousness in his voice, very slight, but she heard it. "I'm just saying that the county near Pueblo has been looking for a deputy, and I have skills that would be useful to a county that needs one. And I thought you should have that information." "Why?" she said, and this time she was smiling, not just the corner of her mouth but fully, completely. "Because I am an honest man and you deserve honest information," he said, and he used her own words back to her with a gravity that made her laugh, that full, surprised laugh that changed her whole face, and he watched it happen with an expression of such open, unguarded pleasure that something inside her chest moved in a way she felt physically. The rain stopped late that afternoon. It did not stop all at once but gradually, becoming first a light shower, then a sprinkle, then a mist, then nothing, and the evening light came through the breaking clouds at a slant that turned everything golden, the mud of the main street and the wet wood of the buildings and the puddles standing in every low place, all of it turned briefly, improbably beautiful by the particular mercy of a sun appearing after 3 days of rain. Eliza stood up and stretched and looked at the sky and then looked at Cole, who had also stood, and they were close on the narrow porch, closer than they had been, and she looked up at him and he looked down at her, and neither of them moved for a moment that felt very long and very short at the same time. "I should check on Clarence," she said. "I'll walk with you," he said. They walked to the livery stable in the clean-washed evening air, through mud that squelched under their boots and past buildings that steamed faintly as the sun hit the wet wood. And the town of Dustfall looked entirely different in the post-rain light, softer and stranger and more alive. Clarence was in his stall, dry and fed and still emanating his characteristic attitude of profound grievance with the universe, and Eliza talked to him in the low, practical voice she used with him, checking his hooves and his harness and the new axle on the wagon, and Cole stood at the stall door and watched with his arms folded on the top rail and a look on his face that she felt on the side of her face like warmth. "He really does hate you," Cole observed. "Deeply and consistently," she agreed. "We understand each other." She came out of the stall and they walked back toward town in the golden evening, and Cole said, "Have supper with me tonight, not the saloon's eating room. Martha Hutchins invited us both. Wade told her about the accounting work and apparently she wants to feed you properly." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "Are we a both already?" Cole was quiet for a beat. "In Dustfall we are," he said, and she heard in those 4 words something that he was telling her carefully, something about how this place had already made a story out of them, and she found she did not mind. Supper at the Hutchins house was the first proper meal Eliza had eaten in weeks. Martha Hutchins was a small, bright-eyed woman of about 45 who moved slowly, because she was still recovering from what Wade described as a very serious fever, but who moved with great determination regardless. She had made a beef stew with actual potatoes and carrots from her garden and biscuits, and there was a dried apple pie that she had put up the previous fall, and she served it all with the particular pride of someone who uses good cooking as the primary language of her love. Wade and Martha sat across from Cole and Eliza at the kitchen table, and the conversation was easy in the way that conversation is when 4 people share a common context: the rain and the mud and the relief of its ending, the small dramas of a small town made larger by 3 days of enforced proximity. Wade was a large, gentle man who had opinions about horses and kept them mostly to himself, and Martha had opinions about everything and kept none of them to herself, and the combination was deeply comfortable. Martha watched Cole and Eliza with the unsubtle attention of a woman who has been married long enough to recognize the early signs of important things, and at one point, when Wade was describing the structural damage the rain had done to one of the town's buildings, Martha leaned over to Eliza and said quietly, "He has been that way for 2 years. Quiet and careful and alone. We wondered if he would ever find someone to sit still with." Eliza looked across the table at Cole, who was listening to Wade with genuine attention, his big hands wrapped around his coffee cup, and she thought about 3 days of rain and 1 word and the particular grace of being understood without having to explain yourself. "He is very good at sitting still," she said quietly. "Yes," said Martha, "but he is better at it with you." Eliza did not sleep well that night, but it was not the worried, restless sleeplessness of the previous 2 nights. It was the keyed-up, alert sleeplessness of someone whose mind is running forward into the future, turning over possibilities the way you turn over cards, seeing what is there. She lay on the cot in the sheriff's back room and thought about 40 acres near Pueblo and a county, looking for a deputy, and a man who sent wires over his morning coffee in the matter-of-fact way that serious people take serious steps. And somewhere in the middle of all this thinking, she fell asleep. In the morning, the sky was the clear, washed blue that only comes after long rain, hard and brilliant, with no clouds anywhere, and Eliza loaded her wagon and brought Clarence out of his stall, and he expressed his usual feelings about this by attempting to bite her shoulder, which she deflected with the ease of long practice. Cole was there. Of course he was there. He stood in the mud of the street with his hat in his hands, which was something she had not seen before, and his hair was dark in the morning light and his expression was the most open she had seen it in 3 days, something stripped of the usual layer of careful reserve. "You're leaving today," he said. "The road will be passable by noon," she said. "I need to get north." He nodded. She looked at him across the morning light. "You said you sent a wire to the county near Pueblo," she said. "I did." And you meant what you said about the deputy position. I did, she took a breath. Then I think you should come and see the land, she said, the 40 acres. When your term is up in November, come and see if it's worth a deputy's trouble. Something shifted in his face, and she saw again what she had seen on the porch the previous afternoon, that open, unguarded thing that was entirely different from his usual containment. Eliza, he said. I'm not proposing anything rash either, she said, using his words again, and his mouth curved fully this time, a real smile, and it changed his face in much the same way her laugh changed hers, made it warmer and younger and entirely different. November, he said. November, she agreed. She climbed up onto the wagon seat and took the reins, and Clarence immediately communicated his opinion of all of this through a series of sounds and movements that expressed comprehensive displeasure, and she managed him with the competence of a woman who has been managing difficult creatures for a long time. Cole came to the side of the wagon. He looked up at her and she looked down at him, and the morning light was very bright and very clear, and the air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings, which was the particular smell of the West after rain. He reached up and took her hand briefly, his big, rough hand around hers, and squeezed once. "Be careful," he said. "Always," she said. He stepped back and she clicked to Clarence, who moved forward with the aggrieved shuffle that was his preferred mode of locomotion, and she drove north out of Dustfall, Texas, without looking back, not because she did not want to, but because looking forward was what she did. It was how she was made, and the road to Colorado was long, and she had already spent 3 days not going anywhere at all. But she was smiling. The road north was everything Cole had said it would be, muddy and rough and slow in the days immediately following the rain, with stretches where the wagon bogged down, and Eliza had to get out and push from behind while Clarence applied his considerable weight in the wrong direction out of sheer philosophical commitment to obstruction. She camped alone at night under the patched canvas cover, listening to the sounds of the open country, the coyotes and the wind, and the particular quiet that is not silence, but is the sound of a world getting on with itself regardless of the humans in it. She thought about Cole often. She thought about the single word he had said and the wire he had sent, and the way he had taken her hand before she left, briefly and without drama, with the simple confidence of a man who knows what he means and means what he does. She thought about November, which was 8 weeks away, and about 40 acres she had never seen that might be good land or poor land or anything in between, and about whether a deputy from Dustfall, Texas would find anything in Pueblo, Colorado worth staying for. She thought he might. The land, when she finally reached it in late September after 3 weeks of hard travel, was better than she had hoped. 40 acres of good grassland at the edge of a shallow river, with a stand of cottonwood trees along the bank, and a view of the mountains that made her sit on the wagon seat for a full 5 minutes without moving, just looking. There was a small cabin on it, built by Daniel's cousin 10 years before and in considerable disrepair, but standing, which was the most important thing about a building. She set about making it livable with the focused practicality that was her primary mode of being. She found neighbors, a family named Hargrove who had a homestead 2 miles east and who appeared within her first week bearing food, and the particular frontier generosity of people who understand that everyone out here needs everyone else. The Hargroves were Thomas and Bess, and they had 3 children, the oldest of whom was a girl of 12 named Anna, who immediately attached herself to Eliza with the tenacity of someone who has been waiting for exactly this specific person to show up. In October, a letter arrived. She had given Cole the postal address of the Pueblo Land Office, which would hold mail for homesteaders, and she had not entirely believed the letter would come because things you half believe in tend not to materialize. But there it was, written in a careful, even hand that surprised her somehow. She had expected something rougher from him. He wrote that he had received a response from the county, that there was indeed a deputy position available in the Pueblo area, effective from the 1st of December. that he would be leaving Dustfall in November as planned, that he had purchased a good horse for the journey, a roan gelding with more sense than most humans he had known, and that Amos, the original horse, would be accompanying him as a pack animal. He wrote that the mountains looked different in October than in August. He had ridden north once to see them, and that they looked the kind of different that made a man think about staying. He wrote at the end of the letter that he thought about the rain often. She wrote back. She told him about the land, and the cabin, and the cottonwoods, and the mountains. She told him about the Hargroves and young Anna, who had taken to following her around with the serious attention of a child who has found a subject worth studying. She told him about Clarence, who had made his peace with the new location and was grazing the meadow grass with what she interpreted as slightly less existential resentment than usual, though she acknowledged this might be optimistic. She told him she had fixed the rest of the canvas cover on the wagon and replastered 2 walls of the cabin and cut enough wood for winter, and that the land was good, genuinely good, and that she thought he should see it. She told him she thought about the rain often too. He arrived on the 14th of November, which was a Wednesday, in the cold, bright light of a mid-autumn afternoon, riding the roan and leading Amos, who was loaded with his belongings in 2 saddle packs, and she heard the horses coming while she was splitting wood in the yard, and she put down the axe and straightened up and watched him come up the track through the cottonwoods, and the light through the yellow leaves fell on him in pieces, and her heart did something that she made a mental note to examine later. When she had privacy, he dismounted and they stood looking at each other in the yard, and there was a moment of the specific awkwardness that comes from having been intimate in a small, real way with someone and then not seeing them for weeks, the recalibration required. Then Cole looked past her at the cabin and the land and the mountains beyond, and she watched his face as he looked at all of it, the way you watch someone's face when you have shown them something that matters to you. "Good land," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked back at her. "Good cabin," he said, and there was something in the way he said it that was not only about the cabin. "It needed work," she said. "Most things do." The corner of his mouth moved. "Most things are worth it," he said. She helped him settle the horses in the small corral she had built, which Clarence occupied with his characteristic energy of low-level outrage, and she watched Cole with the horses and thought about what it meant that he was here, that he had packed his belongings and ridden north because of a word said in the rain, and a letter and 40 acres he had never seen. She thought it meant something significant about what he was made of, the particular quality of a man who decides something, and then does it without drama or conditions or the endless negotiation that some people mistake for caution. She had made supper, because the Hargroves had brought over a joint of beef the previous day, and she had been saving it for this. They ate inside, with the fire going, and the cabin was small enough that the warmth from the fire filled it quickly, and the candles she had set on the table made the rough plastered walls look almost golden. She had put pine branches on the windowsill because they smelled right and cost nothing, and the whole small space had a kind of deliberate warmth that she had created with intention, though she would not have said so out loud. Cole noticed. She could tell he noticed, the way he took it in when he came inside, looked around slowly in his usual measuring way, and then looked at her with an expression that she was beginning to be able to read, the particular combination of appreciation and restraint that was how he showed things he felt strongly. "You've made it a home," he said. "It's getting there," she said. They ate and talked, and the conversation was different from Dustfall, not tentative in the same way, because they had 3 days of rain and letters and distance between them now, and those things had done the work of building something, so that they arrived at the supper table with more of each other already in their possession. He told her about leaving Dustfall, about Walt's reaction, which had been gruff and brief and warm in the way of men who show affection through complaint. He told her about the ride north, about the country changing day by day, getting higher and colder and more dramatic, the plains giving way to foothills and then to the mountains themselves. She told him about the first weeks alone on the land, the work of it, the specific loneliness of building something in a place where you know no one, and the specific comfort of finding the Hargroves and the particular grace of Anna, who had decided Eliza was someone worth knowing with the democratic, non-negotiable certainty of a 12-year-old. "She sounds like you," Cole said. "She's braver than I am," Eliza said. "I doubt that," he said, simply and with conviction, and she felt it land in the way that things said with real conviction do, not as flattery but as something truer. They sat by the fire after supper and talked until the candles burned low, and outside the November wind moved through the cottonwoods and the mountains stood dark and enormous against the star-filled sky. And at some point the talking became quieter and easier, the spaces between words comfortable, and she thought about 3 days of rain, and how sometimes the thing that seems like a disaster is the thing that delivers you exactly where you needed to be. Cole stayed in Pueblo. He took up the deputy position in early December, working under a sheriff named Aldous Crane, who was competent and fair-minded and deeply uninterested in drama, which suited Cole precisely. The county around Pueblo was a busy one, with ranches and farming homesteads and a mining camp, 15 miles to the northwest, that kept the sheriff's office occupied with the particular social difficulties that arise when large numbers of men are working hard and sleeping badly and drinking too much. Cole rode out to Eliza's land on his days off, which were Sundays, and sometimes on a Saturday evening if things were quiet, and they fell into the rhythm of it the way you fall into a rhythm that fits you, not because it was planned but because it was right. He would come up the track through the cottonwoods on the roan, and she would hear the hooves and come to the door. And there was always that moment of recalibration that gradually, over the weeks of December, became less recalibration and more simply joy, unguarded and immediate. He helped with the things the land needed. The roof had a section that was not weather-tight, and he fixed it one December Saturday with cedar shingles and the competent, focused effort of a man who builds things with his hands the same way he does everything else, thoroughly, and without waste of motion. She worked beside him, handing up shingles, and they talked while they worked about practical things, the land and the winter and the cattle she was thinking of acquiring in spring, and then less practical things, books and the nature of weather and the particular quality of mountain light. And she thought about how it had been with Daniel, the constant warmth and laughter of it, and how this was different, quieter and steadier. Like the difference between a fire that burns bright and the kind that holds heat for a long time. She did not think less of either. She just thought they were different things, and that she had been lucky enough in a life that had also been very hard to experience both. On Christmas Day, the Hargroves came for dinner, because Bess Hargrove was a woman who had a theory that Christmas was improved by the maximum possible number of people around the table. And Cole was there, and Eliza had roasted a chicken with wild herbs and made a dried fruit pudding with the concentrated attention she brought to anything she cared about. And the cabin was too small for 7 people comfortably, but nobody mentioned this because the warmth generated by the people made up for the warmth that would otherwise have required more space. Anna Hargrove sat next to Cole and questioned him about law enforcement with the direct, unsentimental curiosity she brought to everything, and Cole answered her questions with the same seriousness he brought to adult conversation, which made Anna regard him with the particular approval of a child who is not used to being condescended to. Thomas and Bess watched Cole and Eliza across the table, the same way Martha Hutchins had watched them in Dustfall, with the knowing eyes of people who have been married long enough to recognize the shape of something growing. After dinner, when Thomas and Bess had taken their children home and the cabin was quiet again, Cole helped Eliza clear the table and wash the plates in the basin, and they worked side by side in the small kitchen space, and the candles were burning and the fire was low, and when she handed him the last plate to dry, she turned to look at him and he was already looking at her. She kissed him first. She thought later that this was fitting, that she had been the one to arrive on the porch in dustfall, and she should be the one to arrive here as well. She kissed him, and he was very still for a half-second, the way he was still before responding to anything important. And then he put down the plate and kissed her back with the same careful, thorough attention he brought to everything. And it was nothing like she expected, and exactly like she should have expected from this specific man, because it was deliberate and warm and not rushing anywhere. When they stepped back from each other, he had his hands on either side of her face, and he was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, completely unguarded, all the careful reserve gone, and she thought that the effort it cost him to be that open was not small and that she understood what it meant. "Eliza," he said. "I know," she said. "I want to be here," he said. "Not just Sundays." She looked at him steadily. "Then we should probably talk about what that means," she said. "I'd like to ask you to marry me," he said, with the straightforward simplicity of a man who has thought about something for a long time and arrived at a conclusion. "Not because you need it. I know you don't need it, but because I want to be here and I want it to be real and permanent, and because I think we would be good together. I think we already are." She was quiet for a moment, listening to the wind in the cottonwoods and the settling of the fire. "I'm not easy to live with," she said. "I worry too much and I like things done correctly, and I have a mule who hates everyone." "I'm very patient," he said. "Yes, you are," she said. "It's one of the things I like best about you." "Is that a yes?" he said. She smiled, and it was the full, complete smile that changed her whole face. "That is a yes," she said. He pulled her in and held her, and she put her face against his shoulder and felt the solid reality of him, the warmth and the steadiness of it, and thought about how strange it was that rain could do this, that 3 days of rain in a small Texas town could deliver you to a moment in a Colorado cabin on Christmas night with a man who said you when you asked him why. They were married in February, in the courthouse in Pueblo, with Sheriff Aldous Crane as witness, and the Hargroves filling the role of family, because family was sometimes the people you found rather than the ones you started with. Bess Hargrove wept, which she said was not about sentiment but about the cold wind, which nobody believed. Anna Hargrove did not weep and instead took detailed notes about the proceedings in a small notebook she carried everywhere, which was exactly what everyone expected of her. Eliza wore a blue dress she had made herself from fabric she had ordered from Pueblo's general merchant, a good blue, the color of the sky on the mornings after rain, and Cole wore his best coat and a new hat, and looked at her when she came into the courthouse with an expression of such open and undefended happiness that Aldous Crane, who was not a sentimental man, found something to look at in the upper corner of the room for a moment. Judge Thomas Reyes performed the ceremony with the brisk efficiency of a man who has performed many such ceremonies and knows how to give them their proper weight without extending them unnecessarily. And when he asked Cole if he took Eliza for his wife, Cole said, "I do," in the same voice he had said "you" in the rain, low and even and carrying the entire weight of what he meant behind 2 words. Eliza said, "I do," clearly and steadily and without hesitation, and Cole put on her finger a simple gold band that he had ordered from a jeweler in Denver, a perfect plain circle with no embellishment because he was not an embellishing kind of man, and it fit perfectly, which she took as a sign of the kind of attention he paid to things. They walked out of the courthouse into the February cold, and the Hargroves cheered, all 5 of them, Thomas and Bess and their children, and Clarence the mule, who was tied to a post outside because Eliza had brought him for reasons she could not entirely explain, expressed his comprehensive opinion of the occasion through the usual channels. "Even on your wedding day," Cole said, looking at Clarence. "He's consistent," she said. "There's something to be said for consistency." Cole looked down at her with that half-smile that had become, over these months, one of her favorite things. "I think he's growing on me," Cole said. "Don't tell him that," she said. "He'll see it as weakness." Spring came to the Pueblo Valley in a slow, persuasive way, the snow retreating up the mountain slopes and the meadow grass coming up green and new, And Eliza acquired 6 cattle in April from a rancher 20 miles south who was reducing his herd. And Cole put up a proper cattle fence on 2 sides of the property on his days off, building it with the same methodical care he brought to everything. And Eliza worked alongside him because working alongside each other was something they had discovered early was where they were best, side by side at the edge of something being built. The land was proving to be what she had hoped it was. The grass was good, the water in the river ran clear and cold from the snowmelt, and the 40 acres had room for more cattle than 6 if she built the operation carefully, which she intended to do. She had plans written out in a notebook, detailed and realistic, year by year, and Cole read them with the focused attention he gave to things that mattered and offered suggestions that were practical and useful, and came from a different angle than her own thinking, the particular value of 2 minds approaching the same problem. Cole was good at his work. Sheriff Crane said so plainly, in the direct way of a man who does not give compliments he doesn't mean. Cole had a quality in difficult situations, a quietness that expanded to fill whatever space it needed to fill, that meant things that might have escalated did not. He was not afraid, and men who are genuinely not afraid, not the performing kind that comes from foolishness but the real kind that comes from having made peace with risk, tend to have a calming effect on situations that feed on fear. There was one incident in the spring, at the mining camp to the northwest, where a dispute between 2 miners over a claim boundary had become physical, and one man had been badly hurt, and Cole rode out alone in the early morning and came back in the afternoon with both miners in tow, both alive, and the boundary dispute resolved by a surveyor he had arranged to meet them at the camp, which was the kind of solution that addressed the actual problem rather than just the symptom of it. Crane told Eliza about it afterward, in the tone of a man describing something he is proud of in someone he is responsible for, and she listened and felt the particular satisfaction of hearing someone she loved described accurately. In June, Eliza realized she was carrying a child. She sat with this knowledge for 2 days before she told Cole, not because she was afraid of his reaction, but because she wanted to understand her own feelings first, which were complicated and layered, joy threaded through with grief for Daniel and practical concern, and a deep, cellular happiness that surprised her with its intensity. She sorted through all of it the way she sorted ledgers, carefully, putting each thing in its proper place, and when she had done this she found that what was at the bottom of all the other feelings, the foundation that everything else rested on, was gladness. She was glad. She told him on a Sunday evening after supper, sitting by the fire with the June dark outside and the mountains enormous and still against the last light. She said, "I think we are going to need to add to this cabin." He looked at her for a moment, very still, in the way he was still before responding to important things. "Eliza," he said. "February or March," she said. "I think." He crossed the room to her in 3 strides and pulled her up from the chair and held her in both arms, and she felt him breathe against her hair, a long, slow breath that contained something she recognized as the particular exhale of a feeling too large for the usual containers. "A baby," he said. "A baby," she confirmed. He stepped back and looked at her with that fully unguarded expression, the one she had first seen on Christmas night, and she thought she would never grow tired of seeing it. "We need more rooms," he said, and she laughed, that complete, unguarded laugh. "Yes," she said, "we do." He built the addition in July and August, with Thomas Hargrove's help on the heavier work, 2 new rooms on the back of the cabin, one for sleeping and one that could be used for the child, and he built them with the same thoroughness he brought to everything, good timber from the mill in Pueblo and careful joinery, and a floor that was actually level, which the original cabin's floor decidedly was not. Eliza helped where she could and directed where she could not, and stood with her hands on her growing middle watching the walls go up and thought about the future and found it good. The summer was full and warm and busy, and their life had taken on a shape that she could see clearly now, the cattle and the land and Cole's work, and the child coming, and the slow, daily accumulation of a life built together with intention and care. She thought sometimes about the woman she had been in Dustfall, standing under the overhang of Harold Peck's general store with $43 and a broken wagon, and a mule that hated her, watching the rain destroy the road north. And she thought about how the rain had seemed like a disaster, and had been instead the thing that stopped her long enough to let the rest of her life catch up with her. She told Cole this one evening in August, lying in the new bedroom with the window open to the warm night, and he listened in his thorough way and then was quiet for a moment. "I saw you come across the street in the rain," he said. "Before you got to the porch, I watched you decide to run for it and then just go. No hesitation." "I was wet," she said. "You were practical," he said, "and brave. Even then, in 30 seconds, I could see that. And that was enough to send a wire to Colorado. That was enough to make me pay attention," he said. "The rest of it came from paying attention." She turned to look at him in the dark. "You are a remarkable man, Cole Mercer," she said. "I just know how to be still," he said. "And to watch," she said. "And to decide and to act. Don't underestimate yourself." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm good at some things," he said. "The things that matter I'm learning to be better." Such as saying what I mean before it's too late," he said. "I spent a lot of years not saying things." She reached for his hand in the dark. "You said one thing in the rain," she said. "One word, and it was the right thing." "I was terrified," he said, and she heard genuine self-disclosure in that, the kind that costs something to give. "So was I," she said. "I just hid it better." He laughed quietly, and it was a sound she loved, his full laugh, which was rare and therefore precious the way rare things are. "You didn't seem terrified," he said. "I was sitting in the rain on the steps of a sheriff's office in a town I'd never been to, with $43 and a broken wagon and nowhere to sleep," she said. "I was absolutely terrified. I was just also practical." "Both can be true," he said. "Both can be true," she agreed. Their son was born in February, the last week of it, in a winter storm that was not as dramatic as it could have been, but dramatic enough. With the snow coming down outside and Bess Hargrove serving as midwife with the calm efficiency of a woman who has delivered several children, both her own and other people's, and Cole pacing the main room of the cabin with the concentrated restlessness of a man whose usual stillness has completely abandoned him. When Bess opened the bedroom door and said, "It's a boy and they're both fine, come in," Cole went through that door with something close to undignified speed for a man usually so deliberate, and he came to Eliza's side, and she put the baby in his arms and watched his face. He looked at the baby the way he had looked at her in the rain, that slow, measuring, open look of a man trying to understand something complete and extraordinary. "Hello," he said to the baby, quietly, with simple directness. The baby, who was very new and had opinions about the world that he was expressing with considerable volume, quieted at the sound of his voice. Just like that. Just stopped and looked upward with the unfocused, profound attention of a new person encountering something interesting. Eliza, who was exhausted and emotional and immensely relieved, found tears going down her face, which she noted was not grief and not fear and not the complicated feelings she had cried from before, just happiness, pure and simple and overflowing. "What should we call him?" Cole said, still looking at the baby. "You choose," she said. He looked up at her. "Daniel," he said. "If that's all right." She had not expected that. She felt it move through her like the first warmth after cold. "You never met Daniel," she said. "No," he said. "But he was someone who mattered to you, and this is someone who matters to me, and I thought that was worth something." She reached up and touched his face. "Daniel Cole Mercer," she said. "Yes," he said. He sat on the edge of the bed with the baby in his arms, and outside the snow was falling on the mountains, and the cottonwoods and the 40 acres of good grassland, and the fire in the other room was going. And Bess Hargrove was making tea in the kitchen with the comfortable authority of a woman entirely at home in someone else's kitchen. And Eliza looked at her husband and her son, and the walls of the cabin that had become, through work and intention and the slow accrual of days, the truest home she had ever had. 3 years passed, And in those 3 years the land grew, and the herd grew, and Cole was made chief deputy with Crane's retirement, and the subsequent appointment of a new, younger sheriff, who relied heavily on Cole's knowledge of the county and its people, which Cole gave freely, because he was not the kind of man who withheld useful things for leverage. Daniel grew from a newborn who quieted at his father's voice into a toddler who ran the length of the cabin and back at approximately 90 miles an hour, and who had his mother's practicality and his father's stillness, which was a combination that manifested as a small, serious, fast-moving person who could sit perfectly still for 10 minutes staring at a beetle, and then sprint to the other side of the property for no discernible reason. Anna Hargrove, who was now 15 and had filled 4 notebooks with her observations and had declared her intention to be a schoolteacher, spent so much time at the Mercer cabin that she was effectively a member of the household, and she adored Daniel with the particular devotion of an older sibling figure, which Daniel reciprocated by following her everywhere and repeating everything she said. Cole and Eliza added 12 more cattle to the herd in the spring of their second year and sold 4 at good prices in the fall, and the money went back into the land and the herd, and a real kitchen stove that Eliza had been wanting for over a year, cast iron and substantial, which arrived by wagon from Denver, and which she regarded with the specific satisfaction of someone who has earned a good thing and knows it. In the autumn of the 4th year of their marriage, Eliza was sitting on the steps of the cabin, a position she occupied often in the early evenings when the light was going and the mountains turned colors that didn't quite have names, and Cole came out and sat beside her, and Daniel was inside asleep, and the evening was very quiet and very beautiful. "I have something to tell you," she said. He looked at her. "We're going to need another room," she said. He was still for a moment, and then the full smile appeared, unhurried and complete. "Or we could build an entirely new addition," he said. "Ambitious," she said. "We've done it before," he said. She leaned into him, which was something she did often now, that easy physical closeness that comes from years of genuine intimacy, the kind that is not only romantic but is made of all the ordinary things, the shared work and the shared worry and the shared laughter and the 10,000 mornings of coffee and the slow, accumulated knowledge of another person. "Do you remember the rain?" she said. "I remember it every time it rains," he said. "Do you remember what you said when I asked you why?" He turned and looked at her, his arm around her, his gray-green eyes serious and warm. "Yes," he said. "Was it true?" she said, not because she doubted it, but because she liked to hear certain things. He put his hand against her face, and his thumb traced the line of her jaw in the way he did, slowly and with attention. "It is more true now than it was then," he said, "which I did not think was possible. In Dustfall it was the beginning of something. Now it is the whole of something." She turned her face into his hand. "It is a very complete life we have made," she said quietly. "Yes," he said, "it is." The second child was born in spring, which seemed appropriate, and it was a boy again, which surprised some people who had made assumptions, and they named him James, after Cole's father who had died in the war, because it seemed right to put both of their histories into the names of the people they were making. James was different from Daniel from his first hours in the world. Where Daniel had been quiet and observant, James was immediate and vocal and opinionated about everything with a passion that exhausted and delighted everyone around him. He was Cole's color, the dark hair and the gray-green eyes, but he had Eliza's expressiveness, her whole face in motion, nothing held back. Daniel, who was 4 when James arrived, regarded his brother with the thoughtful assessment of a person evaluating a new and unfamiliar situation, and then decided, within approximately 2 days, that James was the most interesting thing that had ever happened, and that he was personally responsible for him. A decision James appeared to endorse based on the way he stopped crying most readily when Daniel was near. Cole watched his sons with a quiet gladness that was very different from anything in his life before Eliza, before Colorado, before the rain. He had not known this was something he wanted because he had not let himself want things that seemed uncertain. And a family in a cabin on 40 acres of Colorado grassland had seemed, for most of his life, about as uncertain as anything could be. He had been good at his work and present in the necessary ways, and had kept himself at the careful distance from the larger feelings, not from fear precisely, but from the habit of a man who has lost things and learned to be conservative with hope. And then it had rained in Dust Fall, Texas, and a woman had run across the street through the mud with a traveling bag and a wooden case and $43, and she had sat down at the other end of the step and said, "I come by it naturally about worrying," and something in him had come fully awake and stayed awake. He thought about this on a September evening in the 6th year of their marriage, sitting on the steps of the cabin with Daniel beside him, pointing out constellations that Daniel was learning with the intense focus he brought to any organized system of knowledge. The mountains were dark against the darker sky, and the stars were very thick and bright in the altitude, and inside the cabin Eliza was settling James to sleep with the patience she had discovered she had reserves of that she had not known about before motherhood, and the sound of her voice, low and steady, came out through the window with the warm light from the lamps. "Papa," Daniel said, pointing, "that one is Orion. Mrs. Hargrove says he's a hunter." "That's right," Cole said. "Are you a hunter?" "In a way," Cole said. "I look for things that are wrong and try to make them right." Daniel considered this. "Like what things?" "Like men who take things that don't belong to them. Or who hurt people who haven't deserved it." "Do you always find them?" "Usually," Cole said. "You have to be patient and pay attention." Daniel nodded in the way he had of his father. "Mama pays attention too," he said. "She knows things before they happen." "She does," Cole said. "Is that why you married her?" Cole smiled in the dark. "One of many reasons," he said. "What was the first reason?" Cole looked up at Orion the hunter standing in the cold September sky. "She ran through the rain without hesitating," he said. "When everything was difficult, she ran straight into the middle of it instead of waiting for it to stop." Daniel thought about this. "Mama says you sat with her for 3 days," he said. Daniel had heard the story, told and retold in the way families tell their founding myths. "She says you didn't have to." "I wanted to," Cole said. "Why?" Daniel asked it with the directness of a child who wants the actual answer, not the comfortable one. Cole looked at his son in the starlight. "Because she was worth sitting with," he said. "Some people are. You'll learn to recognize them." Daniel turned this over in his serious, methodical mind. "Are there many of them?" "Not so many," Cole said, "but enough." Eliza appeared in the doorway behind them, and the warm light outlined her, and she was 36, and there was a strand of gray in her dark hair that had appeared in the past year and that she regarded with equanimity, and she was still the most complete and extraordinary thing Cole had ever been still long enough to properly see. "James is asleep," she said. "Daniel, time to come in." Daniel went inside with the philosophical acceptance of someone who knows when negotiations are not available, and Cole stayed on the step for a moment longer, looking at the mountains and the stars and the 60 acres of land, because they had added 20 more in the spring from a neighbor who was moving east, the fence lines running out into the darkness and the cattle quiet in the meadow. Eliza came out and sat beside him close, her shoulder against his, and they were quiet together in the way they had been on the first day, on the steps of the sheriff's office in the rain, the silence between them full rather than empty. "Good day," she said. "Good day," he agreed. "The Hargroves want us for Sunday dinner," she said. "Anna is bringing her young man again. I think it's serious." "He's a good man," Cole said. "Steady. You vetted him thoroughly." "It's what I do," he said. She smiled. "Thomas wants to talk to you about the northern fence line," she said. "Something about the drainage from the ridge." "I'll ride over Saturday," he said. "And James needs new boots. He's grown out of his again." "That child grows too fast," Cole said. "He takes after you in that," she said. They sat in the quiet and the dark, the two of them on the steps of the house they had built together, with the children sleeping inside and the horses in the corral and the mountains standing above it all in their immovable ancient way, and the stars very thick and cold and brilliant. "Cole," she said. I'm glad it rained, she said. He turned and looked at her, and in the faint light from the window she could see the gray-green of his eyes and the full, unhurried curve of his smile. So am I, he said. He took her hand, the same way he had taken it at the wagon before she left Dustfall, briefly and deliberately. And then he held it, which was different, which was the difference between a beginning and a whole life. And the mountain stood in the dark above the valley, and the stars moved in their slow circles, and the cottonwoods along the river whispered in the faint night wind. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The years continued, and the land was good, and the boys grew, Daniel into a young man of thoughtful and observant character who showed, at 17, a strong inclination toward medicine and a gift for understanding systems. And James into a boy of enormous energy and decisive opinions, who had by the age of 13 organized the younger children of the neighborhood into what he called a cattle tracking operation, but which was really an excuse to ride horses at high speed across the grassland while making authoritative declarations. Cole stayed on as chief deputy through 2 more sheriffs, men who valued his knowledge of the county and his particular gift for the kind of patient, attentive law enforcement that solved things before they became violent. And then in his 45th year, he was offered the sheriff's position himself, and he took it, because it was time, and because he was good at it, and because the county needed someone who would do the work properly. Eliza took the cattle operation to 30 head by the time she was 40, running it with the same methodical precision she had always brought to numbers and plans, and she hired 2 hands, brothers named Roberto and Ernesto Salazar, who were good with cattle and reliable, and whose mother sent tortillas with them on Mondays that were the subject of considerable reverence in the Mercer household. She also began teaching, because Anna Hargrove had become the schoolteacher she had always intended to be, but had moved with her husband to a town 2 counties south, and the school needed someone, and Eliza Mercer needed to teach the way some people need to breathe. And so, she taught 3 mornings a week and ran the cattle operation the other days and wrote the accounts in her careful hand every Sunday evening. Cole watched her do all of this with the same open, attentive gladness he had felt since the beginning, the pride of a man watching someone extraordinary be themselves, and he did not try to reduce it or contain it or manage it, because he had learned, in these years of marriage, that the right response to extraordinary things is to let them be extraordinary. On their 20th anniversary, which fell on a cold and brilliantly clear February day, Cole woke early and made coffee, which was the first thing he had done every morning of their marriage, and brought it to her where she was still in bed with her eyes open, thinking, the way she woke most mornings, immediately in possession of a list of things that needed doing. He handed her the cup and sat on the edge of the bed, and she sat up and took it, and they were quiet in the morning way they had, the good silence. 20 years, she said. Yes, he said. Do you know what I was thinking about when you came in? What? The rain, she said. I was thinking about the rain. He looked at her, and they were both older now, the gray more pronounced in both of them, the lines that years of western sun and wind and weather and life put in a face present and honest and earned, and she was still the most complete and extraordinary thing, and he was still the man who had learned to say things before it was too late. I think I'll always think about the rain, she said. Me too, he said. Was it worth it? She said. 3 days of sitting in the rain with a woman you barely knew. He looked at her over his coffee cup with those gray-green eyes and the smile that had never become less rare or less precious. You know the answer, he said. I like to hear you say it, she said. He reached across and tucked a strand of gray-threaded hair back from her face with one finger. It was the most worthwhile 3 days I ever spent, he said, and everything after has been more worthwhile than that. Outside, the Colorado winter held the mountains in blue and white, and inside the cabin that had become a house through years of rooms added and beams replaced and walls properly chinked, and a stove upgraded twice, and a porch built on 3 sides because the evenings deserved to be sat in properly. The coffee was hot, and the fire was going, and upstairs James was beginning to make the sounds of someone whose sleep was being interrupted by the advancing morning, and somewhere in the barn Clarence's successor. A mule named Theodore, who had inherited Clarence's comprehensive philosophical skepticism, but applied it with marginally less personal animosity, was expressing his opinion of the winter. Morning. Cole and Eliza sat in their bedroom in the early light with their coffee and the quiet of 20 years between them, and the love that had started in the rain and grown through drought and harvest and children and loss and work and laughter, and the ordinary sacred dailiness of a life chosen and kept, and it was all of it, the whole of something, just as Cole had said. It was more true than it had ever been, and it would be more true tomorrow, and the day after, and every day of the years they had still to spend on the good land in Colorado, with the mountains watching and the cottonwoods growing tall along the river and the cattle in the meadow and the children grown, and going out into the world and coming back, and the coffee always hot in the mornings and the silence always full between them, and the rain still remembered, always remembered. The 3 days that had been the door to all of it, and the one word that had opened the door, and the woman who had run through the rain without hesitating, and the man who had been still enough and brave enough to say what he meant before it was too late. You, just that, one word and everything after.